Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may find yourselves on this beautiful planet. Welcome to the next episode of Million Doors. Very, very excited about this episode, about this conversation. This morning we welcome Anyango Mpinga to the show. So brief bio on Anyango. So having created a social enterprise, her initiative Free as a Human tackles the humanitarian and environmental crisis of the exploitative labor practices in the fashion industry. So we'll touch on this and many other points this morning with Anyango. So Anyango, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here in your space. So thank you for welcoming me into your space.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You know, you have a really powerful message to share, and we cannot wait to hear it ourselves and for everyone else to share this experience with us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Absolutely. So thank you for being here with us. We really, really appreciate it. And we've had our grounding meditation in advance, and we've had the real joy of spending some time with you in advance of the recording. So thank you for that. So I think we can really just dive straight in. And our first point of discussion is the role of activism within fashion. So if we'd like to start there, Anyango, that'd be great.
So this one's a big one for me because I feel like when you think of the fashion industry, the first thing that doesn't come to mind is activism, right? The fashion industry is built, it's built on almost like just pause.
Go on, say it. You can say it. No one's going to judge you. Speak your truth, girl.
So I feel like generally like the fashion industry is quite superficial.
Yes.
Right? You have an industry that tells people what they should be and how they should look, versus actually telling them that they're beautiful in their own skin and that they should wear whatever, skin they're in with pride, So when it comes to activism in fashion, you also have to look at how you're selling your product, the products that you're creating, and the people behind these products, So when you're thinking of manufacturing, how are the people who are making these clothes being treated? Because at the end of the day, we all know slogan T-shirts. We all know like all these T-shirts that are meant to empower women. But at the end of the day, if you are selling a T-shirt to empower women and you're saying female empowerment, let's say on the T-shirt, and the women who have made the T-shirts are not empowered, then there's a problem around it, right? And when you think of activism in fashion, there's always been this, there's always been a thing where you see celebrities jumping on campaigns, to elevate different, whether it's charities and use their voices in activism. But nobody ever really thinks about the people behind the clothes. Nobody really looks at the supply chain when it comes to even like picking the cotton, for instance, because this doesn't really, it's not just about who made the clothes, it's about the entire supply chain, and this is something that I've also been trying to challenge myself, is to really find out, where is this coming from? When you think about fashion and sourcing, you do have people who exploit labor, child labor, even in the cotton farms, for instance. And you really have to be careful about where you're sourcing your cotton, right?
Absolutely.
And then you also have the use of pesticides, for instance, harmful pesticides which harm the environment. And so you've got to look into that. So I feel like as an industry and as designers, we have the capacity to change how the industry works. When you think about what's been happening with COVID, there's been a lot of talk about brands who haven't paid their workers, for instance, or who have cancelled orders and made it so that the workers who had produced their collections weren't going to be paid because they're holding back money from paying the factories, right? And these are global brands that I'm sure you've seen talk about empowerment and inclusion. And yet, they're the same people who are exploiting the people who make the clothes for their brands. And what has happened is that by people in the fashion industry actively speaking up about it, they've had to come back to the drawing board and commit to paying the factories for the orders rather than canceling them, because some of these orders had already been delivered. And I feel like this is what fashion should be. It should be used as a voice to change the narrative around how we treat people, how you treat workers, and really just, these are our essential workers at the end of the day. We never really considered it that way. But now with the current global crisis, we're realizing that the people who are making the PPE masks and all the equipment that is needed to tackle COVID, these are the important people within the fashion industry. The people who make our clothes are very important, and so we have to treat them as that and pay them well.
Fully agreed. And we are seeing this now. Like the true cost. This goes back to the Tom Yangu episode, I feel, Ev. Out of sight, out of mind. It's easy to buy the T-shirt that empowers without having any idea what the true cost is. So that T-shirt has gone on the bill for people and planet. Horrendous working conditions, pesticides, herbicides, as you say. So there's a real deep contradiction there. And that is what this moment in history is all about. It's about considering the true cost of that T-shirt, the true cost of that cup of coffee, that true cost of absolutely everything. And we discussed it this morning. It might just take that extra minute. I mean, we are literally in the midst of launching a clothing brand. And it has taken us a lot longer, a lot more headaches. We could have launched a month ago,
right?
Really easily. But when we actually stood back and had a look at how these things work, and we saw that through many of the potential suppliers, there was just a really limited visibility on the supply chain. And I think where there's limited visibility, there's likely something that, that people are hiding, frankly. Because when you've got nothing to hide, you just say, okay, we're transparent, here you go. Where there's a lack of transparency, there's a real question mark around that.
And I think
it's so funny because a lot of times people have asked me, like, why do you just mention your suppliers like that? Aren't you worried that the competition is going to try and use that information for whatever reasons? And I just think it's ridiculous, because I have no problem mentioning who's manufacturing my clothes. I have no problem mentioning where I'm sourcing my materials, because it's an important part of the industry. There's a transparency index actually that Fashion Revolution does, basically highlighting the brands that are showing what they're doing in the fashion industry. And within that transparency index, you see that there's certain brands who don't divulge a lot of information. They'll divulge enough just to make it seem as though they're doing something, And this goes back to the whole idea of greenwashing, where I'm just going to check a few boxes so that I look like I'm doing something. But on the back end of things, 90% of my business is based on exploiting people and exploiting the environment. But if I do this 10%, then I'm going to look like I'm doing something important in the industry, and people can back off. And consumers are much smarter than we give them credit for. People are actually looking for information right now. So people are awakened to the fact that, if you're not doing the right thing, we're going to be asking you a lot of questions, and there's a desire for a lot more accountability.
Yes. Yeah. I think the provisions must be ethical, right? They have to be ethical. Yeah. And there is a real lack of sincerity and transparency in so many things nowadays. And, the system has been designed in that way so people can, have easy access to instantly gratify themselves with whatever product it is that they choose to spend their money on. And, it really is our responsibility to spread this message and to bring awareness into people's minds and eyes so they can actually feel inspired to do some more research and know where to look.
Yeah.
Just as the system has been kind of manipulated and things have been hidden to kind of delude people and just allow people to kind of go with this flow of easy accessibility, if you like.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to turn that on its head and actually bring the same awareness to people's minds so they can really see the truth behind these things. Because there are a lot of smoke screens. And, we're now coming to a place where the world, we've really, really stepped into a new world now, People's levels of consciousness are seriously high. And, people are so awake now and they're screaming out for the truth. And we know that whether it's global climate change or fashion industry or anything to that matter, if we don't stand up, we're just going to destroy the planet that we're living on. And that's not where the world's going. Gaia doesn't want that. The earth doesn't want that. The people don't want that anymore. So there's a lot of support now.
Yeah. I think when you think about fashion, it's always been profit before people and planet. Right. So that's the fashion, and that's how the fashion industry has existed all this time. And we're basically at a time where we're saying that's no longer enough, and that's not even normal. So we shouldn't think that it's normal to exploit someone who's making clothes.
Not acceptable.
It's normal to pay someone a monthly salary, an amount which you would use in a cafe. $20 is something that you would use in a cafe on a sandwich and a salad, maybe, if you're lucky, depending on where you are. That's not a monthly salary. That's not a monthly wage for a human being who's supposed to take care of their family and feed themselves, And I think collectively, it's so important to have our voices speak out. Because those are situations that are happening even in Africa. You have countries that are now hailed as leaders in manufacturing. I'll give an example with Ethiopia, for instance, and they have a great leather industry, but a lot of the factories that are outside of the capital, outside of Addis Ababa, for instance, where the global brands have set up their own manufacturing plants. I'm not going to mention them because it's not important to highlight them, but this information is out on the internet. But what they're doing is actually exploiting labor. So they've gone from we were in Bangladesh and, the unions are getting stronger there. So we're going to move to Ethiopia where there is no human rights law. First of all, a human rights law doesn't really exist to protect workers. There's no established minimum wage in the country as a benchmark for people to follow when it comes to hiring people. So basically, this company can come in and set up a manufacturing plant and say, we're going to pay workers $20 a month. And there's nothing anybody can do. We're going to keep them working for 18 hours. We're going to make sure they don't have breaks. And that's just what we're going to do. And there's nothing you can do about it. And the government really does need to be does need to step in situations like that and say, no. Because the difference is in Kenya, there's actually a set minimum wage, So a lot of factories will work in Kenya, but they know that it's going to cost more because people have to be paid a certain price. It's not to say that there's no exploitation happening in certain areas. You have to investigate and you'll come across it. But at least there's a benchmark, that protects workers. And we need to get to a point where globally there's a benchmark that protects workers.
And the responsibility for this does lie on the shoulders of government, but it also lies on the shoulders of manufacturers. Because what is the true cost of that £5 t-shirt? Well, the cost per use is astronomical. So you can spend £25 on a t-shirt that is made in the correct way, made to last.
Yes.
Made in fair conditions. For people and planet, £25, but you wear that t-shirt, let's say 100 times. Your cost per use is negligible. You buy the t-shirt for £5, you wear it once, and And then the true cost to people and planet is astronomical. And I think this is the thing that people are really awakening to, which is fantastic. So I want to flow. Sorry, Anyango, please.
No, I think to point to that about you wearing it for a long time with the right brands, and this is something that I'm also looking into incorporating, is that when you've worn that T-shirt 100 times and you've mended it as much as you can, there needs to be a system where you can return it and it goes back into recycling and there's regeneration of something new, so that it's not going to be discarded and end up in a landfill somewhere. So that's also something that's really, really important.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think, we mentioned Rapa Nui before we started recording. And then, we've also looked into Rapa Nui. And we actually use a firm by the name of AS Color who source everything, responsibly for people and planet. So I'm so happy to mention those businesses. And I'm so happy to get feedback and input and opinion from consumers and from other brands and from the B Corporation community that we're both part of and both, stepping into. Because I want to know, because I see my manufacturing partner as a really close partner. I don't have to keep that a secret. I also don't have to pretend that we're out there, we have our own factories and we're making our own T-shirts, because that's nonsense. Because nobody within the fashion industry, or very, very few, are vertically integrated to the point of doing everything from the beginning at the end, because that's not how life works. We all have our part within the value chain, and we do add value by doing things in a conscious way and considering the ramifications throughout the entire supply chain. And then we add value through the message that we're sharing and through the design, the quality of design, creating things that people want to wear. They are meaningful to them. That does add value.
Collaborations are so important in our industry, and we need to embrace that more and more. I think there's this competition, which is like a lot of people get stuck in, but it's so important to collaborate. And, with Rapa Nui, I just approached them and I said, listen, I need to do something. I need to do new T-shirts for a campaign. I know that your company has gone through all this process. And I even discovered they've got their own brand called Tino, and they've got a circular T-shirt. So T-shirts that have been discarded or that have come to the end of use are taken back by them, and then they recycle these T-shirts and create something new from it, So it's their circular T-shirt, and I'm a big advocate of circular fashion. So closing the loop, so that nothing that is considered waste actually goes back into the environment. And I feel like this is the system we need to adapt when you're working with people, or when you're thinking about your own brand, because like you said, you can't do everything. I know I can't do everything, and I don't want to do everything. I think it's not a good use of my time as a designer to design something and then to sit there and stitch and then to do, to try and be the postman as well.
Yeah, no. You physically can't. And I've tried to, actually, as an artist. I got to the point where I want to do everything from beginning to end. So I've, built frames, stretched canvas over the frames, then done the work, then built the frame to go around and all the rest of it. And I just thought, wow, I can't physically do that. I work on one by one. So by the time I've built the 9 canvases that I need for a series, that's taken me a week. And I've still not grown the cotton for the canvas.
No, I was talking to an artist, incidentally, because I think artists are used to working in studios, and he was asking me, so what's the plan for the next week? What are you designing? And I said, well, I'm going to be here designing a collection. And he said to me, well, are you going to go and then prototype it and do this and do that? And I said, well, you have to understand, when it comes to the fashion industry, it can be very wasteful. Yeah. That process of prototyping a new product can be very wasteful. So if every time you have an idea, you decide to put a material into it and then it doesn't work out, you basically end up having tested 100 products rather than actually taking time to narrow down your ideas. If you have a few ideas that are working, build up on that and then minimize the waste that you put in the prototyping process. Because waste in fashion doesn't just mean overproduction. It starts with the manufacturing process. It starts with the sampling process and prototyping. And you really have to be careful about what you're doing in that process so that you minimize waste. And I was saying to this artist that, one of the things that I'm doing for my next collections is actually prototype, have my patterns, my patterns that make the construction of the item, have those digitized, and then try and have a 3D model done to test the product. Because once you have an item in 3D form, you basically get it. It's an actual piece that people can see. You can look at the texture of the material. You can test the market with it. You can test the response before you actually launch into producing this item. And when you produce this item, you can produce it on demand versus going into like producing and sampling and all that. And then in the end, you have these samples that are sitting there, and I think the world is changing. The world of digital fashion is changing. I don't know if you guys know about Helsinki Fashion Week, which is hosting like a very, it's the first real sustainable fashion week. And,
Brilliant.
And all they're doing is like, they actually banned the use of animal leather, at their shows. And they've asked that every designer who's part of the platform is using natural materials or, at least sustainable materials. Fantastic. And it's great because they really care. Like for me, I would want to be aligned with a show like that really cares about the product that they're putting out versus a show that is just about, hey, look at us, we're glamorous, but you don't really care about the materials, you don't care about the environment.
Really?
It's almost like, okay, so like when you cook a meal, right, you can cook the meal unconsciously, or you can really, consciously cook this meal and experience and embody the soul of the process of cooking. Mm-hmm. And, we talk a lot about self-sourcing. Mm-hmm. And, when you self-source something, you make it yours. You connect to the energy of whatever that is, whether it's water, your food, or clothing, be it in this case. Yeah. And I think that, it's really interesting what you're saying because there is so much power in really understanding the product and going into the energy of what it is because, you value that very thing so much more. And if you take the time to really understand where it's come from, who's made it, how it's being sourced, and, you can actually self-source yourself to that product. And then it's not just a t-shirt, right?
Right.
It's not just an item of clothing.
Right.
This is the heart and soul that's gone into the creation, right? Which is what so many people are overlooking nowadays with everything. Yeah. But in this instance, clothing, the people that are making these items, it's a real thing to be able to own that item and wear it with pride and dignity and respect.
Right.
Yeah. The way we carry. Sorry if I interrupted.
Sorry, mate. No. Over to you, please. Only because you said sorry. Only because.
Thank you. The way that we carry an Elvis Syncrasy bag with pride, because we know that is sourced responsibly the whole way through. That is the repurposing of waste, and that's empowering to the people who are actually making it because they pay a fair wage and beyond. And that's why they quite happily say it's an expensive product. It's fine. But buy it or don't buy it. That's absolutely up to you. But the people who are manufacturing this are paid, fairly. Anyango, I'm so conscious that we could actually continue on this subject for hours, but I really do want to hear about your thoughts on the inclusion of Black voices and people of color within the fashion industry.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's something that has been lacking since the beginning of fashion, in whatever way you look at it. We come from a place where mainly the Black people that you would see, or people of color that were in fashion, tended to be behind the scenes. They tended to be the people stitching or doing the manual labor. And for the last 10 years, I think you've seen more Black designers coming into play in the fashion industry, and models as well. Well, with models, I mean, when you think about Naomi Campbell, that's longer than 10 years. But what has been emerging recently in conversations in the fashion industry is a lack of representation, to the point where like big magazines like Vogue are acknowledging the lack of representation in their teams, in representing Black designers. And I think it's come a time where Black voices and people of color need to be amplified for their knowledge, because what's been happening behind the scenes is that, and I've experienced it myself, is you share your ideas, but when they're voiced by someone who is non-Black, it's received better, or it's received stronger because it comes from that voice. And it's a bias that we see a lot, and we've seen a lot in the industry. It really doesn't mean that we don't hold that power in sharing our messages and our fashion, because a lot of brands that are not from the continent have been known to appropriate, or to emulate design that has come from Black designers or people of color creators. And when it's created by people of color, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. But the moment Louis Vuitton does it, suddenly it's like, oh my God, this is such a cool new idea. And we're like, what do you mean this is such a cool new idea? Someone did it before. It just so happened that they may be from the continent, or a person of color. So I think in terms of representation, we really need to do a lot of work in how we approach Black creatives and people of color. Again, based on, and not just because we want to jump on, Black Lives Matter and elevate Black voices. No, because we're just as worthy of taking up space.
Amen.
Just as worthy of taking up space based on our own intelligence, knowledge, talent, and being comfortable with that, and for the audience to be comfortable with the fact that this beautiful piece of work has come from a Black person, and I admire it. I admire their connection to the history. I admire their work ethic. I admire their design. I admire, insert appropriate adjective. Yep. And so there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of representation. Even when you think about models and think about the past few years of the modeling industry, you're seeing more curvy women on the runway. But like, I remember the first time I showcased my collection, my very first runway show, and this is me who doesn't come from a fashion background, but I was really excited about it. So I asked some of my friends to join the runway, and the way I did it, I said to the organizers, I want you to put in the regular models first, and then at this point when the music changes, I want the curvy women to start coming in, just surprise element, And that was received so beautifully, and everybody was just in awe of that. And from that on, I said, as much as possible, I want to have that representation seen, even if a lot of my shoots at the moment haven't showcased like a lot of diversity, mostly because of how we do like our sampling process. I think it's so important to have Black voices elevated in a way that is not tokenized. So it's not a token. We're not doing it because that's our token Black friend. You know what I mean? Or we're not doing it because that's a token Black designer. We're doing this because we believe in what they have to share with the world. And so I think within the fashion industry, there's so much work to be done, to be honest.
Do you feel that work is beginning to happen, or is it where are we within this momentum piece?
We're just starting, to be honest. And you know what? It took the death of one man to actually awaken people to the racial injustice. It's not because things haven't been happening. They've been happening. It just so happened this time it was filmed. And what happened is that it caused a ripple effect around the world, because a conversation turned from it highlighted police brutality, but it also started highlighting just how marginalized Black people have been in all industries. You know, when people started doing the Black Square, that was really meant to amplify Black voices and show the world their businesses. Because people realized, and there's like movements now that are forming out of this, because people realized that we are not elevating Black artists, for instance. You know, when you think about exploitation in fashion, these are all people of color most of the time that are manufacturing these clothes, whether you think of Asia or Africa, right? And for magazines and institutions to come and say, we recognize that we don't have representation. I mean, this is a good example. When you look at companies that have a department in their offices for representation, where the role of this person is supposed to be representing the Black community, guess what? Chances are 99% that person is European or not Black. So how am I supposed to trust someone who doesn't live my own experience to represent me in the best light? You understand? Yeah. So for me, it's always been such a contrast when I see things like this happen, because I'm like, well, if you're going to have a department and talk about representation, shouldn't you actually have a Black person or a person of color who understands how they want to be represented for you to communicate that to your audience? You know?
That's really shocking to me that you would have such a department and the department itself isn't even representational. You know, yeah. That's completely insane.
You see it when, like, you know, Gucci did blackface and like all these brands. There was that monkey T-shirt that was done by another brand. And then they came out and said, oh, you know, now we acknowledge that this was wrong. They gave a public apology and said, we're so sorry about this. We've actually dedicated, we're going to include our team. We're going to include people of color in our team, because the only reason something like that would happen, and the only reason things like this would happen, means that in the boardroom, when people were discussing this marketing campaign, there was no person of color in there to actually tell them, this is wrong because this part of your audience is not going to receive that well. You know? So it starts from there. And then when you create a department to handle inclusivity and diversity, you still put in someone who doesn't have an understanding to fill a gap. I mean, there's obviously things there that need to be looked at from an institutional level.
Without a doubt. And I mean, yeah. I think the danger is when inclusivity and representation itself becomes a marketing strategy, then exactly. we're into a whole other, nother world. And that's, you know, another flavor of insanity. And I feel that this is certainly a standalone, and there's certainly, you know, a forum discussion to be had around this. And this, you know, this is its own segment, you know, right. Definitely. And we can go on for this for a lot longer, but I know that you have other areas that, you know, you'd like to and need to touch on, because I really want to hear about Free as a Human and the work you're doing for the future.
So I started Free as a Human about 2 years ago, and the idea behind it was to challenge the concept of freedom for human beings. And of course, this was inspired by my interactions with a local, and by local I mean a Kenyan NGO that was working with survivors of human trafficking. So I've been doing some stuff with them. I had my own service project that I'd been doing with them, and then kind of sat back and said, well, you know, how can I support these guys? I mean, at the time and still, you know, running my business, I felt like, well, I don't have money to give you guys, but I do have my voice. And there's something that I can do within my brand to also help support your activities. And that's kind of what I did. You know, I started with nothing and basically just said, well, what do I have? I have a voice, and, you know, and created Free as a Human, and then said, you know, for the first, I want us to test this as a pilot, you know, for the first project. And initially it was just meant to be an initiative, hey, do a campaign, raise some money, donate it to them. But this ended up taking a life of its own, because as soon as I was doing it, I had people asking me, like, what can we do? We didn't understand how bad human trafficking was. And this goes back to the role of fashion and activism, is people just don't understand how bad the situation is until you say something. And as creatives, whether you're an artist, visual artist, or fashion designer, then you have the power to use your art to actually talk about important things in a way that people will understand and consume differently. And so when I started doing Free as a Human, it grew from there. And we're now in the process of registering it officially in the UK and the US as a nonprofit foundation that will support women and really. So one of the gaps we realized, like when interacting with Heart Kenya, is they're on the ground doing all the rescues. So they're rescuing all the girls from trafficking perpetrators. They're really like persecuting the perpetrators. They have a legal team within that. So they're doing all the work on the ground. And so I figured, well, I don't want to be doing the work on the ground when someone else is already doing that. I want to make sure that my partnership supports what they're doing already, right? And so one of the gaps when I was in conversation with them that I realized is that, when they rescue girls from trafficking, they basically, have them in their shelter. So they give them counseling, they, give them rehabilitation, and then try to get them back with the community. And, some of them are young, they're as young as 6 years old. So they're then taken back to like primary school. And they're actually working with girls from like the age of 6 to 18. So these are very, very young women. And one of the questions that I asked afterwards was like, okay, so what happens when they get older? Because after the age of 18, this is where you're really trying to be an adult. And if you were living with family, chances are they want you to go back and work and bring back money. And so from this, there was just no real like follow through on that, because it's already like intensive for them to actually be taking them through this process and underfunding. And so I said to them, well, I think the next step for Free as a Human is actually creating a program where it's like an apprenticeship, so that, some of the women that you work with that come through that come through Heart Kenya and that you've worked with at your shelter can actually access learning opportunities, that will elevate them and actually get them to a point where they can gain employment, but like not limited to just doing manual labor, So this is something that will expose them to the arts, whether it's photography, whether it's like different elements of fashion, and pairing them with other companies and other professionals that are working within the industry that they can learn from. So this is like hands-on education where, if we have a student who can, or a person who, has been doing very well in school and can get a scholarship, then it's matching them with an institution for that.
So it's almost like a creative work experience, like an apprenticeship in a sense.
Yeah.
But not just, go and get a job. Here's a job.
No.
Something that actually you feel connected to, something that they're passionate about.
Something they're passionate about, and really giving them something like, I think if I wanted an opportunity, what would I want for myself? And then I apply that to when dealing with them, and dealing with the ladies and saying, well, I don't want you to just take a sewing class because it's the only option that's available. In the fashion industry, there are all these different aspects. You could learn how to code. You could learn how to be a good graphics designer and become a surface artist and, design textiles. And it's exposing them to all these opportunities that will then actually give them something that they can take away and do, and gain employment,
I think this is fascinating, right? I'm really, feeling the energy behind this, because I tell you something, people that go through trauma and experience trauma are super high creatives, right? And they're so driven and motivated, and the stuff that they come out with is insane. I mean, you've got to think about some of the designs and or the photographs if they're getting into photography, or that energy must be channeled once they clear the trauma, or maybe part of clearing the trauma is applying the energy from the trauma and the experience into the creative process. And they're the ones that make magic.
They do.
Make magic, yeah.
They really do.
And I think if you're offering that to them at such a young age, it's such an invaluable tool for their future that can really help them to transcend the experience a lot quicker than not,
Absolutely. And with Harp is, they've already been engaging them in some photography and like music. So you have some of them who are like really, really good at dancing. So it's really just broadening this and making it more accessible and then also sharing it with the world and saying, I've survived this because and for them to be the ones to say I've survived this, because again, when it comes to dealing with survivors of human trafficking, you want them to be the ones to come and say, hey, look at me. One of the things that when I was thinking of my upcoming campaign is people kept asking me, like, why don't you get some of the survivors of trafficking to like wear the t-shirts and do that stuff? And I was like, no, because then we're playing off of their victimhood.
100%.
And putting them out there and saying, oh my God, look at what we're doing for so-and-so, which is why on my platform, you will never see anyone who's a survivor of trafficking that didn't purposely want to be there.
Agreed.
Because that's not what it's about. You have campaigns and charities often showing victims or survivors just to get more sympathy, and I think that is such a misuse of human human beings and their dignity, and this kind of thing needs to stop. We want a situation where when girls are coming from an empowered place because they've gone through trauma, it's their own choice. They want to speak out to empower other people, and it's well within their right to do so, but we shouldn't be the ones telling them, oh, why don't you pose so I can take a photo of you so that we can show the world what we're doing? That's not what this is about, and it's never been what I'm about.
I think we're either disempowering or empowering people. I don't see that there's a lot of middle ground in that. You said something really beautiful before we started, and I think it was around the oneness of humanity, human oneness.
I call it human oneness, but oneness of humanity is one of the tenets of Baha'i faith, by the way. It's one of the things, and I grew up Baha'i. So it's one of the tenets, like oneness of humanity is when you think about what the Baha'i faith stands for, it's oneness of humanity, oneness of religion, and oneness of, so oneness of humanity and oneness of religion and oneness of God. There's only one spiritual being that we look up to at the end of the day. Wow. So when I was thinking about the campaign for July, I kept going back to human oneness because we really are all connected. We're one human family at the end of the day. And everything that we do has a ripple effect. So if we take on things that have been happening, you think about human trafficking, it's not exactly, it's based on exploitation. It's based on taking advantage of someone else. It's based on, disrespecting someone's dignity. And how we can go back and cure that is approaching everything from a point of oneness. Because the moment as a community and as a global community, we start talking about oneness, we may not know the effect that it will have, but it will generally have a positive effect on things. When we think about, because I also believe in the power of words, so every time you talk about we're fighting this or we're fighting that, you're just amplifying the problem and you make the problem stronger than it should be. But when we think about oneness and what it should be and what it represents, and just the connection that as a human family we need to continue to be aware of, then we're collectively helping the world actually, deal with all these issues. So I think for me, human oneness just made sense for this time around.
Well, I mean, it's everything that you are, right? It's everything that your organization is built on. The energy behind
Right.
what you're bringing to life and bringing into people's awareness is based on this principle.
Right. Absolutely.
And this is kind of like the back end kind of you say with the clothing, it goes right back, doesn't it? Yeah. These things are being hidden, so transparency. But I really, really feel what you're about and the soul of yourself and all of your companies and organizations, because it's very pure, clear and transparent, and that it's authentic and integral.
Right.
So I'm so happy to have kind of like really experienced your journey and your journey through your work and where you're taking this. And I really want to support you as much as I can personally, because I'm just super passionate about your work. We need more Anyangos in the house for sure.
Absolutely. Well, there's only one Anyango, but yes, totally.
Okay, that didn't come out.
No. Totally agree. I couldn't agree more. There's only one, but we need more. Fabulous. And I think about this sometimes. It's a sort of meditation when you're eating. You just think about everyone who's involved within that supply chain, and you send out some gratitude. Now, always it's the unknown farmer, because where are those potatoes coming from? Where's these peas coming from? Everyone within that whole supply chain, and you pretty soon realize that everyone in the world is involved in that plate of food, one way or another. Do you know what I mean? It's enormous. So I'm just feeling right now that there's some kind of t-shirt, there's some kind of design, and maybe we can look into this, Ev, but something that just gives credit to everybody who's involved within that whole process, the whole way back, because that causes us to look at it. You know what I mean? And we have it now, right? Better Cotton puts focus and emphasis on everyone throughout that cotton process. Then, all right, where are our dyes coming from? How is our printer operating? Who's in the factory packing these things? And and you can name these people. Yeah. Because they deserve it.
You do, and it's such a beautiful way of honoring also like just people and the journey, isn't it? Like, and acknowledging that this item of clothing took a community to make it. It didn't just drop off from somewhere else. It took a community and it took human hands to make it, and for you to feel the love when you wear it. Yeah.
And that's when you do wear the garment over and over, and you repair it until it's irreparable, and then you return it back to the manufacturer, who then puts it back into the cycle. This is clearly the way forward.
Absolutely.
Very, very, very obvious. And I think any other way of operating soon becomes very questionable. It's like you've said with the Helsinki Sustainable Fashion, that asks huge question of all other fashion weeks, doesn't it?
Yeah. And in fact, it's brought up a conversation about the future of fashion weeks. Because in Helsinki Fashion Week, they were already planning on going digital. And then COVID happened, and it just elevated the fact that they needed to go digital, and fashion weeks need to do this. And for me, from a design point of view, where I get invitations to be part of fashion weeks every time, and I just don't say yes to any of these.
Sure.
It's because I feel like they're not aligned with what my brand is. And for Helsinki Fashion Week, like this year, they've created a residency program. So I'm not doing runway this time around, but I'm part of their residency program, where it's a community to collaborate, and showcase your talent in one way or another, work with the community, working with the 3D artist, and we're going to basically like give this visual representation of fashion that I highlighted before. And I think that's having a residency. It's the first time a fashion week has a residency program where it's bringing in selected designers from all over the world to come together and form this community. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And this is the kind of thing that we need in the fashion industry. It's no longer about who because that's how the fashion industry has been for a long time. It's like, oh, this is so-and-so because they know this person. Or, because they can pay me this much, we're going to include them. It's really about bringing people together to share in their vision of the future of fashion.
Beautiful, beautiful. And fashion absolutely can and sort of must lead the way in these things, because everything that we've discussed here is transferable onto every other industry, right? Yeah. And we've discussed this around agriculture with Tom, we'll discuss it within architecture with Chris, like these things just roll on, and we can take out the word fashion and then put any other industry. But fashion just seems like a really logical place to start, and frankly, a really easy win. It's easier to flick these things over.
Yeah, 100%. Because, we've been spending time at home for the last 4 months, and everybody is just busy looking at, what am I going to wear on my next vacation? This is kind of like what people have been thinking of. It's like, oh my God, I can't wait for the restaurants to be open so I can get dressed up and feel good about what I'm wearing and go out and meet friends. And so but within that, it's also good to encourage people to think about what they're going to wear and how they're going to purchase this item. So it's no longer about like, let me just buy 100 million things that I'm never going to wear. It's like now going out and meeting people and all these occasions are like, oh, this is a special occasion. Therefore, I'm going to make sure that my purchase has purpose, right?
Yes. Beautiful.
Purchase
beautiful.
has purpose.
I love that. I love that. So good. So good. Now, I believe we're going to have to start wrapping up. Anyango, I'm so sorry, and we will have to have you back. And definitely, I invite you to this forum. We'll discuss that offline. But I think now we'll begin our wrap-up process, and I begin that by expressing some, deep gratitude for you for coming on and joining us in this space. It really does mean the world.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, honestly. Yeah. It's really
Absolutely.
My pleasure to be with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also then invite you to share your social media links and how people might be able to connect with you.
If you're on Instagram, it's at Anyango Mpinga and at Free as a Human Official. And then for Facebook and Twitter, it's Anyango Mpinga and Free as a Human. So those are 2 different accounts. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Anyango. And thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, it's been a very powerful experience for me personally. I've been sitting back fairly quiet this time, just absorbing and reflecting on everything that you've shared. And it's been a very heart-opening experience for me. So I'm sure for many others and everyone else that hears this too. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. Thank you for the space and time.
That's okay. No worries. And we'd love to see you back soon.
I'll be back.
I'll be back. Amen to that.
In fact, I shouldn't say I'll be back. I should just be saying I'm here to stay. So
that's it, yeah.
Hey, listen, you can go and come as much as you want. You know what I mean? It's no problem for us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
1 second. Just looking for this document.
That's no problem at all.
I didn't have it up, but it's fine because I'm just going to edit that.
That's absolutely fine. But I'm going to just jump in and say, Anyango, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because the point actually of Million Doors is once you are in the space, you're in. Right? Do you know what I mean? And there's a million doors to the thing, because it's a completely open invitation to all.
Yeah.
We say that there's a field beyond thoughts of wrongdoing and right doing, and we'll meet you there. And that's where we are, and that's Rumi. We've lifted it from Rumi. Bit of plagiarism there. Thanks, mate.
Inspired by Rumi. Come on.
That's it.
It's all one, right? We share everything. We don't reinvent the wheel, man.
Actually, I think I was I read that quote, but I can't remember who I was listening to who talked about it. Was it Wayne Dyer in one of his podcasts? In his audiobooks or something?
Absolutely possible.
So I did come across it about a month ago.
Okay. Right.
And I will share this. I rewrote it and I had an artwork in it. I'm going to share it in our group right now because you wouldn't believe it. You'll think I already created it. But it was something that I had done. And I think you stopped recording, right? So this is sort of like just us having a conversation. I hope. But yeah, so I had actually written it down because I was sort of in this place where I was writing down like some of my favorite poems and things and quotes from different people. And one of my other favorites is also "Do not go back to sleep."
Yes,
love it.
Do not go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And yeah, so Breeze don't have secrets to tell you. So that's the one I did. Well, that's Breezes. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna send it to the group when I find it.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. So guys, you can find. Sorry, let's have a look.
See,
somewhere beyond right and wrong, there is a garden, and I will meet you there.
Beautiful. you know, I love it.
The divine making, playing.
I love it. Babaji would say proof. This is proof of the divine support and encouragement that we receive. And we have these clues all the time, all day, every day. If only we would see, if only we would pay attention.
Yeah. We do need to pay attention. I talk about that all the time. And I think there have been days when I haven't been paying attention.
No doubt.
And then there are days when things happen and I start remembering things that I wrote down a while back. And you saying that, I'm like, well, didn't I write that down in like one of my phone collections? Because I have this app on my phone. So anytime I'm inspired by something, I just create a graphic of it. Yeah, and so that was one of them. And I posted it on.
Fabulous.
You've got to make sure you capture those little golden nuggets every now and again, right? So don't lose them because they're like so powerful, right? Yeah. I try and do it as I go now, do you know what I mean? But it's very rare that I miss it now. But sometimes when you just get so busy, you kick yourself afterwards, right? You're like, I wish I had that.
So Ev, if you just want to record, because we can play around with the end, it's no problem. But if you want to record the closing segments, then you've got it there.
Yes, I'll do that now.
Yeah, cool.
So, guys, for the benefit of our wonderful listeners, you can find Anyango's podcast and our entire back catalogue on our website, which is milliondoorsmovement.org. Our Facebook is Million Doors, and our Instagram is million.doors. YouTube is nice and easy. It's just Million Doors. These podcasts are uploaded on all digital platforms, and you'll be able to access them and find all of the guest links attached to the podcast if you'd like to do some further research or follow any of their work. And they're all free of charge and no fee, of course, available for download or streaming wherever you get your podcasts from. And with that, we'd like to thank you again, Anyango, for coming onto the show. And we hope you've had a wonderful experience with us.
I really enjoyed it. This is the best thing I've done in a really long time.
Yeah, so we feel like that every Monday as well, right?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy.